Hello everyone. Welcome to the BMES Professional Development webinar entitled Computational Modeling for Regulatory Science in the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratories at the FDA. I'm Walt Baxter and I'll be your moderator today. Today's webinar will focus on ways that the FDA is promoting and encouraging the use of appropriately validated computer models during regulatory submissions. This is also the first webinar sponsored by the Medical Devices Special Interest Group, so welcome. As I said, my name is Walt Baxter. I serve as a Senior Principal Scientist at Medtronic in the Neuromodulation Group, and I also serve on the organizing committee of the BMES Medical Devices Special Interest Group in the role of a counselor. Very happy to be involved in that organization. If you have any interest in contacting me after the webinar, my email address is listed here, so please jot that down. Appreciate your attendance and time today. Let me go through a few housekeeping items before we get started. This is a recorded webinar, and it will be archived and available shortly after the webinar on the BMES website, likely tomorrow. You can submit questions to our speaker, Leonardo, throughout the webinar by using the online chat function that you see in the bottom left of your screen. Your questions will be addressed after the speaker presentation, but please stack them up as the presentation goes along. I will unpack them at the end of the presentation kind of from first question forward, so please just lay them in there. Please take a few minutes to complete the brief survey following the webinar to provide us with your feedback. It really does only take a couple of moments to fill that out. And in order to do that, we ask that you don't immediately exit the webinar right at the end in order to fill out that brief evaluation. Since this is our first webinar, we really could use some feedback, so thank you for that. Hey, before we get started, we have a little interactive poll. We'd like to get a little bit of information about who is on the call, who's listening today. So to answer the polling questions, let's see here if I can advance to that slide. There we go. I'd like to have you answer several questions. The first one is, which of the following best describes you? If you would click on one of the radio buttons, I'd really appreciate that. We're looking to see whether where we are across the spectrum of biomedical engineers who might be interested in the topic. So far, we're cracking the 15 number. Looks pretty good. Looks like we've got a lot of faculty and industry here. Here are the results of that question. Thanks for participating. So that's great for our speaker to know. Again, thanks for your attendance today. Does everyone here know about the Center for Devices and Radiological Health? Have you heard that term before? Everybody know what it is? If you could just answer yes or no, we'd appreciate it. All right, now we're getting close to maximum capacity here, and it looks like it's an overwhelming yes, although a few of you don't. So you're in the right place if you've never quite heard that term before. We're going to learn all about that in just a second from our speaker. Another more specific question, while the Centers for Devices and Radiological Health, or CDRH, is one part of our talk today, I'd like to know who knows about the Office of Science and Engineering Labs that is housed within CDRH. Please let us know if you've heard of the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratories. And if you're just joining us, it looks like a few people are walking in. We're taking a survey, getting some good information about our pool of attendees today. As expected, I've noticed this. Most people know about the Centers for Devices and Radiological Health, but less individuals understand what the Office of Science and Engineering Labs, or OSEL, is at the FDA. So again, you've come to the right place. This is a great opportunity to learn about those laboratories and some of the great work going on there. Okay. Without further ado, I'd love to introduce our speaker today. Dr. Leonardo Angelone is a research biomedical engineer at the Center for Devices and Radiological Health inside the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratories, or OSEL, as we just described, at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Leonardo received a degree in electronic engineering from the University of Rome in 2001. In 2008, he received a PhD degree in biomedical engineering from Tufts University. Dr. Angelone has completed 2 research fellowships at the Department of Radiology at Mass General and at Harvard Medical School. He was a postdoctoral consultant with the Research and Development Department, Surgical Products Division at Hologics Incorporated from 2008 to 2009. And finally, he joined OSEL in 2009, where he served as a research biomedical engineer. Dr. Angelone has authored more than 80 peer-reviewed journal articles and conference proceedings. His research interests include the assessment of energy deposition and heating induced in the human body by medical devices using electromagnetic energy. In addition to his very busy work schedule at OSEL, Dr. Angelone has volunteered to serve on the organizing committee of the BMES Medical Devices Special Interest Group, where he is a counselor. And even more exciting, he is chairing next May's BMES FDA Frontiers in Medical Devices Conference that we're all looking forward to. So without further ado, let's welcome our speaker, Dr. Angelone.
Thank you, Walt. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here and thank the BMES for the opportunity to provide this webinar. The first time I actually give such webinars. Is quite interesting also to see all different logistics and interactions. I'm going to go through the presentation, and I think we are going to keep the questions at the end. Okay, so I'm going to go. We heard about, I'm with the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratories, and I'm part of one of the 4 divisions of this office, is the Division of Biomedical Physics. Brief overview, I wanted to highlight one of the roles of the FDA, and going back to the US code, which is really to promote the public health by prompted efficiency review in the clinical research. So I wanted to emphasize this aspect of promoting. We often hear about protecting, of course, public health, but is the promoting part that I wanted to emphasize today, and remind also who listen that we specifically for medical devices, what we are looking is the reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness of devices intended for human use. And of course, when the reasonable assurance part opens up to a lot of questions, a lot of discussion can be of what does define reasonable assurance. We do that by the US code in consultations with experts in science, medicine, and in cooperations with consumers, users, and manufacturers. So this is a background because our role within the Office of Science, we are scientists, we work with the Office of Device Evaluations and the Office of In Vitro Diagnostics and all the offices within our center, but we also work with industry experts through standard committee, through joint working groups, and we are through also mechanism of research collaborations as well as with academic entities and faculties. We have PhD students, so it's really a 360 approach to promoting public health, and that we want to One of the definitions of regulatory science, this is the definition used within the FDA. You may find other type of definitions on the web depending on the perspective. But what we see at FDA as regulatory science is really the science of developing new tools, standards, and approaches to assess the safety, efficacy, and quality of FDA-regulated products. There was an interesting article a few years ago by the Commissioner Peggy Hamburg and Michelle McMurray-Heath that emphasizing this is the figure is taken by that article. What regulatory science is really placing between what is the basic research, most traditional NIH-funded basic research and the proof of concept, and the product development, which really occurs at typically industry or company. And that's where our role fits. And here, this figure show one of the mechanisms of interactions between the FDA and other stakeholders, industry and non-profit, which is the Medical Device Innovation Consortium, which is a consortium that involves over 50 groups and was founded in 2011-2012. Most of you are familiar with the CDRH. So this is a recent organigram of the FDA with the commissioner. You see there are 5 major offices, super offices. In particular, there is the Office of Medical Products and Tobacco, which supersedes the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, the Center for Drugs, Center for Tobacco, and Center for Biologics. And we are within the CDRH. So this is where CDRH is located within the FDA, which is now a size of 17,000 employees, mostly located in the White Oak campus here in Silver Spring, Maryland. The vision of CDRH is really patient-centered, and I'm highlighting really the first sentence of the CDRH vision, which is the patient in the U.S. have access to high-quality, safe, and effective medical devices of public health importance, first in the world. So it's really about patients, and we are all interested, whether it is agency, whether it is industry, academia, we're all interested ultimately to provide patients access to devices that are safe and effective. And that's what the goal we are working towards. Within the CDRH, see that most of you are not familiar with the Office of Science and Engineering. Probably, I guess my interaction from the industry folks has been mostly with the Office of Device Evaluation, of Office of Vitro Diagnostics. Those are the offices that handle the pre-market submissions. And there are other offices within the center. Our office is really focused on the research part, and we conduct, this is our vision, where we conduct laboratory-based regulatory research. We provide scientific and engineering expertise in support to other offices within our centers, and we collaborate with academia, industry, and government in developing standards and methodologies to assess safety and effectiveness of medical devices. Within our division, I'm part of the MR, Magnetic Resonance Safety Group. We have a relatively small group. There are 5 staff, permanent staff. We have research fellows, people listed on the slides. There are PhD students or postdocs, recently graduated postdocs, that typically spend with us sometime between 2 and 5 years, depending on the length of the fellowship. We focus on safety of devices with particular attention to interactions with electromagnetic fields. And most of our work is focused on magnetic resonance, and so safety of patients with implanted devices or external devices, such as neurostimulators, orthopedic device, pacemakers, electroencephalography or electrocardiography devices that undergo MRI. And so we look at the safety of such devices, safety of the patients wearing these devices. as mentioned, we do that in collaboration with several institutions. Here, a list of some of the institutions we are interacting. As you can see, it includes software companies, medical device manufacturers, universities, as well as hospitals. Today, I'm going to briefly present some of the ongoing work in our research, and specifically with specific attention to the use of computational modeling. So how do we use computational modeling to assess the safety of devices? And the specific focus of today's presentation is the radiofrequency-induced heating during MRI. We're going to look at the use of computational modeling in RF coils, models of human anatomy, and the safety of the patients with implanted devices. So on the first part, I recognize some of the people attending the presentation, some others, so I'm going to briefly spend a few minutes on the MRI structures. Magnetic resonance imaging is really one of the most used diagnostic tools. There are over 33 million exams a year of MRI, and so a lot of patients can take advantage of the benefits of such diagnostic tool. MRI is generally considered safe, is a safe technology. There are, of course, however, some possible safety issues that are well controlled, and they are well controlled also because of, thanks to the several tools that are being developed over the years. One of the safety issues that they are present with MRI, and the one specifically that today I'm going to focus, is the safety with respect to radio frequency fields. So one of the three fields that are used in MRI, together with the static and the gradient fields, the radio frequency field is the one used to elicit the MRI signal. And when the RF energy is absorbed by the patients during the exam, can generate an increase of absorbed energy in the body, and if that is not controlled, that can generate an increase of temperature, excessive temperature, and hence consequently would be a thermal damage of tissue associated. The way to RF heating depends on several variables, and mostly we can categorize as three main parameters. Is the source of the radio frequency field, which is the coil, and you're seeing here. There is the patient itself, that's the load of the coil. And for CDRH, another aspect is additional medical devices that may be implanted in the patient. So I'm going to go through examples of each of these three categories. One of the focus of our research is looking at the sources, the RF coils. So here you see an image of a custom-made radio frequency coil, a body coil, similar to what is used in MRI. The specific frequency of this coil is a 64 megahertz, which is the frequency used to elicit a signal of a 1.5 Tesla MRI in proton imaging. The analysis that we performed, this is a study that is published, and the related paper can be found on PubMed, or I can provide eventually. If you contact me via email, I'll be happy to do so. The question that we study here is, once you have a physical source, and you want to use computational modeling to estimate to evaluate that source, what are the characteristics of the model? How precise needs to be the model that you are building in order to have an accurate representation of the physical reality? And I'm making a distinction between the precision of the model and the accuracy. The precision really speaks to all the details that you can include in the model, but that doesn't necessarily mean that a model which is more precise, is going to provide a real representation of, or an accurate representation of what's the physical core. So we look at literature and we looked at representations of the coil as found in literature. And here below this slide you can see 4 different representations. These are representation of the electrical circuit associated to the coil. Without going into the details, you can see there were differences in terms of the conductive, the sources, the feeds, and how the coil were fed electrically, also in terms of elements, whether you were using parallel resistance and capacitors, or whether you were not using any of these lamp elements in the coil. And so we looked at 4 of these representations. The numerical coil, you can see that the geometrical representation is pretty much a good replica of the physical coil. Of course, there were no cables, for example. The cables were not included in the model. So is that something that may affect the results or not? And ultimately, what we are interested, how this relates to the regulatory science, is that based on the results of such studies, we know what are the minimum information that is required in a model when a safety of a patient in MRI is evaluated using computational modeling. So another step that we did here, we have an electromagnetic lab here in our office, where we have the physical coil. This is a schematic of a physical system. It's a robotic system with electric and magnetic probes. They are allowed to measure the magnitude of the electric field and the magnetic field as generated by the coil. So we perform experimental measurements. The image on top, you can see the coil. You can see a so-called phantom, a box, essentially a box filled with saline solution, and we measure the electric field in several planes, which are the planes here highlighted in red. Both planes that were along the longitudinal planes as well as axial planes. We collected this data of electric field and magnetic field, and we compare those data with the results of the simulations, the electromagnetic simulations performed with the models that I showed before. Here is a summary of some of the results that we collected, and on top you can see the magnetic field, the magnitude of the magnetic field, and on bottom is the magnitude of the electric field. We are looking at a plane at the center of the phantom, and we're looking at the physical results, and then we're looking at the results from 5 different computational models, S2, G32, H16. These acronyms you can see in the paper, they're pretty much short for the number of sources that were used in the model or the way that the electrical circuit was implemented. Visually, you already can see that some of the models provided quite a different magnetic field compared to physical measurements. But interestingly enough, you can see that there are 3 models, and here is the data of the error bar between measurements and simulations. 3 of the models provided a good representation, even visually but also quantitatively, of the physical reality. So what here is signed as S2, G32, and H16. And this really speaks to the, allow me to go back on the model circuit. So you have 3 models that pretty much allow to simulate the same type of electric field. There are 2 constraints here. We're looking only at a specific plane. So the context of use really is we are interested in what happens inside a phantom. We are not looking at data that are anywhere else, or this is not to say that the entire coil is accurately modeled. But if we are interested in the electric field on a given plane, and this could be we are interested in the electric field inside a patient near a device, on a specific location of the device, then you can have given simplification of surgery model, which ultimately allow to have faster simulations and reduce computational costs, and still have accurate results. And so this is what then informs the review process, and where we really make a difference between what would be nice to know and what is really need to know with respect to a pre-market assurance of safety and effectiveness of a device or a patient in a device. And just to give an idea of what does it mean, what I intend in terms of context of use, here we're looking at a plane inside a phantom. What if we are interested in looking at a different area of the coil? So what if, for example, we look at what happens between the phantom and the coil? So this is the representation of the magnetic field and the electric field here in the bottom, measured and simulated by 3 of the models. And as you can see visually, only if you focus on the electric field, so the image on the bottom left, only the model S2 was able to properly and accurately represent the 2 peaks near the feet of the coil, which were observed in the physical coil, in the physical measurements. So again, if you are interested in something that is happening inside a phantom, then you may use a model like the H16 or G32. But if you are interested to the electric field, and maybe you have a device which is placed between the phantom and the coil, so close to the coil, then models like the H16 may not allow to have accurate representation of the physical. The other open questions, which we're not answering here, but I'll leave it for your consideration, is how good is good enough? So how accurate needs the model needs to be in order to be considered appropriate for our context of use? Is it a 5%, a 10%, or a 50% a good accuracy for the model? And this is really open. It depends on the type of application. It also depends on the claim and several other factors, which typically include safety considerations or labeling, ultimately labeling of the device. So this was a study, and see if you are interested in additional information, you can find information in the paper which is studied here. This was about one of the elements and was about the coil. Another area of research is regarding the human anatomy. There has been an ongoing effort in our division, was led by my colleague Dr. Wolfgang Kainz. We started many years ago, and was an effort done in collaboration with other groups, specific with EDIS Foundation in Zurich, and as well as other stakeholders, which brought to the development of anatomical models, which are really numerical models based on MRI collected from volunteers. And you can see here what is called now the virtual population. So the original was a virtual family, which really entailed 4 models, adult male, a model of an adult female, and 2 children, which was more recently extended to include all these 9 models. You can see the image. And these models have been extensively used in regulatory submission. There was a recent analysis done within CDRH that showed that the virtual population has been used, family virtual population has been used in over 120 different regulatory submissions. And along that line, more recently, we have done a project still in collaboration with EDIS Foundation, with Mass General Hospital, with the University of Vienna, where we collected MRI data of a volunteer, and we developed a numerical model of a human head, is what we call the MEDA model. This model is available, it's freely available. It can be downloaded from the website. The information about the model is on this paper. And so far, this was the paper was published last year. We already had 110 groups. They have downloaded the model. They are using it for research and can be used for research. And there are no constraints. There are some constraints regarding the privacy data. Let me show a small video. So the model is currently the probably we can say the most precise model in terms there are 150 anatomical structures that were segmented in the model. We took advantage of data which included T1 and T2 with MRI data as well as MRA, and so they're allowed to segment vessels, blood vessels, arteries, and veins. And the resolution of the model is a 0.5 millimeter resolution. Some more details regarding the model. So you can see how these were the original data that were collected in Switzerland on a 3 Tesla system, and then based on the MRI data, the different anatomical structures were labeled. The model as itself, it's a purely geometrical model. So there is information about labels of anatomical structures. The labels are based on literature, so the user can then assign electrical properties or thermal properties depending on the specific use of the model. We also have developed a surface-based representation of the model itself. We're still working on this and trying to make it user-friendly. It's the 150 structures result to be quite heavy when loaded on a FEM structure. So, but as you can see, we have doing ongoing work on that. And the last part I wanted to discuss in the time left was the device part. So we looked at the source, we looked at the human anatomy. The third main component is the device itself. So we are doing some work, and I'm showing here some of the work done in collaboration with Mass General Hospital, where we're looking at the brain simulator. This is one category of the devices that we are looking and we are modeling, and we're looking at what happens if a patient with a DBS undergoes MRI, how is the RF heating, what are the variables affecting RF heating, how these variables affect RF heating, and what the simplifications that we can have in terms of the model itself. And this is on one side in developing, it really allows to develop also the different tools. We started, as you can see, we did this study back in 2010. This was with a more simplified model, and that really, based on the results that we obtained in the study, then raised the need of maybe we need a model of the human head which is more precise, and that we embarked in the next step, which then brought to the development of the MEDA model. Another aspect is what about different technologies? So this was a study again done with Mass General. It said, what happened when the design of the device changes? We, as an FDA, we don't develop devices. We're looking at methodologies to evaluate devices, and so of course this is a great opportunity to see we have a new device, you have a new technology, new possible design, how the characteristics of this device affect RF heating, and what is it that we can do, what type of methodologies can we use to evaluate such devices. DBS is an active implanted device, so there is no current standard. There is ongoing effort, of course, including FDA and industry, in developing safety assessments for active implanted devices. This particular study was done at 3 Tesla, which is something that is still down the road in terms of market. And provide an example of how we do that by combining, again, computational models. This is a model of a phantom in a coil with the MRI, and experimental measurements. Computational models by itself, it's pretty much useless unless it's somewhat verified and validated against experimental measurements, and with a given uncertainty analysis associated with both the numerical simulations and the measurements. And we're working that in what are the parameters, how can you do a validation of a numerical model. So this study was published last year, and we verified a possible approach of this technology. And again, we were able to implement the device as well as the numerical model and calculate the RF heating depending on different parameters, so changing the characteristics of the design of the devices, and see how that can be obtained. And then eventually building a prototype of this device. Just to give an idea, we're talking about a wire, which is really a nylon wire, which was coated by gold, titanium and then gold, and playing around with the thickness of the coating, it was pretty much generating 2 layers with 2 different conductivity. So we're playing at the interaction and the difference in the phase and the reflections between the 2 layers that allowed to make a bad antenna in terms of RF. So a device that will still be able to transfer the current when you stimulate, but it wouldn't be a good antenna in terms of RF heating. And again, if you are interested, you can find additional information in the paper cited below. So I'm hoping, of course, we continue to do research collaboration agreements and working in several other areas. I'm hoping to have provided a glimpse of what is the ongoing work. We keep busy, and I will leave it now. Thank you for your attention. We'll leave it up to the questions, which I see there are few online. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonardo. That was fantastic. Quite a few questions rolled in, and we now like to take some time to get to your questions. Just to remind you, those of you who have questions, we're using the chat window in the bottom left of your viewer. So please just keep those flowing. Type those in there, submit them, and I will flag them as questions, pull those in, and we'll get to those. I think after Leonardo finishes answering, if you have any clarifying questions, feel free to type away there in the chat window. I'll keep an eye on that just to make sure we're all good. Our first question comes from Kenneth Olray. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Kenneth asks, can you provide recommendations for obtaining accurate anatomical models for free or low cost for initially evaluating an electromagnetic technology? Leonardo?
Thank you for the question. I think the question came before I presented the slides on the virtual family, on the MEDA model. Those models are available, and they are freely available. The question Kenneth is asking about accurate anatomical models. So there is a caveat. The term accurate implies that there is a validation against experimental measurement. So this is something that even for the MEDA model is still open. I wouldn't define the model as an accurate model for electromagnetic application, of course. And as detailed also in the description of the model, we can say that there is an anatomical accuracy because we based the model on the MRI data, and we based also on an atlas, and there was an anatomist that worked on generating the anatomical structures. So that part of accuracy is covered, but the specific application, whether it's electromagnetic or other, that would require a validation of the model.
Perfect, Kenneth. I hope that hits the mark. again, if we ask your question and it's just a little bit off base, or maybe you feel like you asked it badly, no problem. Just re-chat a follow-up, and we'll get to it. Our next question comes from Ryan Packett. He asks, does your phantom model allow for blood perfusion? And if not, how do you think the inclusion of perfusion would affect the results?
Thank you for the question. The phantom model, the SDM phantom model that I showed, is a saline-based phantom, so as it is now, it would not allow for blood perfusion. There has been variations, been phantoms where people have included some tubes that would somewhat simulate perfusion, blood perfusion. But as it is now, the SDM, the saline phantom, does not take into account perfusion. And in general, perfusion would reduce the effect of temperature. And there are two schools of thought in that. The local heating would be reduced by perfusion. And if you look at literature, what is the BMES equation, it would overall reduce the heating when you take into account perfusion. There are other groups that say that the blood is not a heat sink, which is infinite heat sink. So if you pretty much taking energy, the blood takes energy on one side, it will end up increasing temperature somewhere else. But in general, locally, the effect of perfusion would be that the heating is reduced. Of course, the question is how much is that the reduction? Is it a 10%? Is it a 60% or a 80%? And there also, other question is how is the specific organ react when is exposed to heating? And the response of the vasculature in the brain may be different than the vasculature in the muscle. So it's ongoing discussion, and more recently is an area on which we are starting to do some more active research.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ryan. That's a good one. We have a great question from Chris Bassiano, Becton Dickinson. He asks, is the HEAD model an FDA-approved MDDT, which I believe is a medical device development tool? And so since Chris asked, maybe you could start by telling us what you know about MDDTs for those on the webinar. And then is the HEAD model an FDA-approved MDDT? Thank you.
Yes, and thank you, Chris, for the question. I can actually do some advertisement. This is something that we plan to discuss and present more at the BMES, at the 2017 BMES conference. So discuss more about the medical device development tools, and the conference will be in May. So if you are interested, also this is another good reason to join us at the conference here in Maryland. Medical device development tool is a recent program. It's been generally the past 2 or 3 years. It's a recent program by the FDA, and the idea is really to qualify tools the medical device sponsor can use in the development evaluation of medical devices. And the qualification means that the FDA has evaluated the tool and concurs with available supporting evidence that the tool really produces scientifically possible measurements and work as intended for a given context of use. So to answer his question, the MEDA model is not an MDDT tool. There is not yet. And one of the caveats that I mentioned is the context of use. So would the model, what would be the specific context of use on which the model is used? Would it be electromagnetic safety for a specific device or a more general? And of course, the broader the context of use, the more it becomes difficult to validate the model itself. So at the moment, not, but certainly we're considering that option, and we're looking into that possibility. For now, it certainly is a tool that is made available to the community and for applications that can be open and left to the users.
Excellent. Again, if anyone has any follow-ups, definitely do that. Actually, we have one that just came in from Ryan Packett. Ryan asked a question about free or low-cost models, and he now asks, you mentioned that there are variations of the phantom in existence that do include perfusion. Are there published papers on them? If so, could you point us towards them?
There is an ISMRM abstract that presented one of such phantoms, to my knowledge. And if you email me, I think I can somewhat recover that abstract. The ISMRM is the International Society of Magnetic Resonance in Medicine. So feel free to email me. I'll be happy to try to recover that abstract, point out to the authors.
Appreciate that, Leonardo. And actually, would you mind finding the slide that has your address on it? I think it's maybe 37. There we go. So anyone who has follow-ups, there's Dr. Angelone's direct email there. So perfect. Moving along, another great question from Hisham Sharif. He is curious about computational models for functional anatomy as opposed to structural anatomy. We touched on that a little bit with the perfusion, but do you have any other examples? I think that's what Hisham is asking for.
Thank you, and that's a great question. In fact, the MEDA Model was the first step of an internal project, which is really whose the goal is to develop functional anatomical models. And so we're talking about multi-scale models where for neuro simulation applications where you have a first level model, anatomical model that you use. You calculate electric field distribution, and then you link to neuronal level models where you can then estimate the neuronal response for a given electric field in a given module. This can be, for example, the case of a deep brain simulator, or even we have actually published a study recently where we have looked at the neurosimulation response for patients undergoing MRI, and was the response of with respect to the solicitation that comes from both the gradient fields as well as the RF fields. So it was a temperature modulated response for the induced simulation of gradient fields, and was published this year. The first author is Ezra Neufeld with Physics, Medicine, Biology. I can provide the paper if you email me.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and again, the contact point for Leonardo is shown on the screen.
Just give me
another
a couple of days to respond.
Yeah, right. Particularly around the holidays. So it's our another question comes to us from Kagya Amoako. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, Kagya. They write, if there are no standards for ensuring the safety of patients with implanted devices, then how does the FDA currently clear these devices for clinical use? Maybe a little bit of a misunderstanding there, but you want to take that one?
Yeah, and thank you for the question. It allows to clarify. What I mentioned is that there is no current standard for safety of patients with active implanted medical devices undergoing MRI. So it was a very specific section of, so we're talking about safety of patients. The active implants are devices like deep brain simulators, pacemakers, cochlear implants. And the standards I was referring to was specifically for safety of patients with such implants undergoing MRI. We're not talking about standards in general about active implants or standard for patients with implanted devices. In fact, there is a standard, an ACM standard, that speaks about safety of MRI for passive implants. So for the active, these are new areas, and really also allows me to say why we do the research here, because there are new areas. Up to 2010, there were no pacemakers that were approved by the FDA for a market for an MR labeling. So patients with pacemakers were not approved to undergo MRI by the FDA, but not approved for the market here in the U.S. The first pacemaker that received MR labeling was the Medtronic Revo, and that occurred in 2011. And so as we move forward, this is being done at 64 megahertz. So there are certain areas where, if you look at labeling of deep brain stimulators, patients with deep brain stimulators undergoing MRI, the labeling are restricted to only specific conditions, which is, for example, the use of 1.5 Tesla. There is no currently approved DBS for 3 Tesla. And so this is where the work that we do with stakeholders in developing standards allow to develop the tools that then will go back and eventually allow to have the knowledge to have devices clear in the market. On the other hand, standards are not necessarily a requirement for approval of a device. It's really on the sponsor to provide the evidence to the FDA, the evidence of the safety and effectiveness. And so on one side, we do the work with standards. We also do work in the FDA guidances that come up in which we suggest what is the type of information that is needed. We recently have published a guidance on computational modeling, for example, and what is the information that is suggested to report in computational modeling reports provided to the FDA in pre-market submissions. The guidance is not a requirement, is not a law, and again, is up to the sponsor based on what I showed at the very beginning. The U.S. code is provide the safety, all the data, they provide safety and demonstrate reasonable assurance of safety and effectiveness. Hope that clarifies a little bit.
Yeah, and Kagya, if we misunderstood your question, definitely chat a little response there. We'll get to it. It was a good one. Standards definitely lag regulatory work for sure, and the technology. One final question I wanted to just read out I had myself is Leonardo, way back at the beginning you were going through some of the mission statements that the CDRH offers up for ensuring the safety and effectiveness of devices. One of those was harmonization. And it got me wondering, it seems like as you walked through some of the current research going on in your field, that there are several international labs that are really doing great work. Can you talk a little bit about how you've maybe partnered with European regulatory agencies or Asian or any other international agencies to kind of harmonize here, or is it too early to do that?
As far as I know, there is no there's no an equivalent of the CDRH in Europe. Having said that, however, we do work with international organizations, including European universities as well as test companies. And for example, we have an ongoing work in is an interlab analysis where we have provided the same model of the coil, the one I showed earlier, to 4 different groups. And we have provided certain instructions, minimal instructions, based on literature, pretty much what you can find in literature. And we ask them to run the simulations. One of the teams perform experimental measurements, and then we are comparing the results. And we learned quite a bit throughout the process. And the results were not, as you may imagine, identical. And really, this gives us an idea of first how the way you pose the problem and you pose the question really affects the analysis, and also what is it that we can specify or not, or the variability of results that we can expect. And that includes different softwares used, but different approaches different experience of the users. We don't necessarily support one software against another one, and even the models that I showed before, whether it's the visual family or the MEDA model, those are made available to the public, but that is by no means is a requirement that or an assurance that you have to use that model in your submission, or that if you use the model you're going to get the approval. That absolutely is not the case.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Thank you. All right, and I think in the interest of everybody's time, and we also would love everyone to take just a couple minutes to provide a little feedback. That'll pop up in your browser here in a second. We'll thank our speaker with a silent clapping. Thank you, Leonardo. That was fantastic. Again, this is our first. This is our first webinar sponsored by the Medical Devices Special Interest Group, and so those of you on the call here who've paid up your annual dues to be a member of the SIG, we really appreciate it. Your dues helped offset the cost of this webinar. The other thing I want to make sure to really emphasize to everyone is you can see plenty of discussion of this topic today as well as other regulatory science work at our annual conference in College Park, slated to happen from May 16th to the 18th, 2017. An important date to tell everybody about on the webinar is that January 22nd is when abstracts are due. And if you'd like to get instructions about how to submit an abstract or learn about the tracks that are laid out for the meeting, I put a link to the meeting in the bottom left of the chat window. Be careful when you, it looks like when you click on that you may lose your webinar window, so just maybe copy that for now. But in closing, we'd just like to thank you. Really appreciate you all taking time out of your day to learn a little bit about the topic, and we look forward to future seminars. So Leonardo, thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Everyone have a wonderful day. Thank you.